Good morning. Welcome back to yet another section of women's writing. Today we are going to start the next poem, We Are Going, written by Udgaro Nonukkal. Maybe you are not very familiar with Udgaro Nonukkal. Let us start with Udgaro Nonukkal. Udgaro Nonukkal, also called Kath Walker, original Anglo-Australian name in full Kathleen Jean Mary Ruska. She was born on November 3, 1920 in Australia. She died on September 16, 1993 in Brisbane. Udgaro Nonukkal was an Australian Aboriginal writer and political activist, considered the first of the modern day Aboriginal protest writers. Her first volume of poetry, We Are Going, it was published in 1964. It is the first book by an Aboriginal woman to be published. Raised on Stradbroke Island of Moreton Bay, Queensland, where many of the ancient Aboriginal customs were still practiced. The child, baptized as Kathleen Ruska, was a member of the Nunukal tribe. Her formal education ended with primary school. At the age 13, she entered domestic service in Brisbane. At age 16, she was rejected for nurses training because of her Aboriginal descent. She became an activist for Aboriginal rights. In 1942, she enlisted in the Australian Women's Army Service, and that same year she married Bruce Walker, though the marriage was short-lived. She campaigned successfully for the 1967 abolition of discriminatory, anti-Aboriginal sections of the Australian Constitution. Although she was a vocal critic of Australian government policies, she was awarded the MBE. Its full form is Member of the Order of the British Empire in 1970. She returned the award in 1988. So we already understood Udgaro Nonukkal. She was the first Aboriginal woman to be published a book. She was baptized as Kathleen Ruska, was a member of Nunukal tribe. Her original name is Kathleen Jean Mary Ruska. Her formal education ended with primary school. At the age of 13, she entered domestic service in Brisbane, and she also tried to learn nurse training course, but she was rejected at the age of 16. Then we already understood in 1942 she enlisted in the Australian Women's Army Service. Then after that she married Bruce Walker, but that marriage had a short life. Understood she was awarded the MBE in 1970, but she returned back the award in 1988. Then we are going to speak about her famous works. Walker's writings include The Dawn is at Hand. It was published in 1966. My People, a Kath Walker collection. It was published in 1970. Containing her two previously published books of poetry, in addition to new poetry, fiction, essays and speeches. Stradbroke Dreamtime. It was published in 1972, including stories of her childhood, traditional Aboriginal folk tales and new tale cast in traditional form. a children's book, Father Sky and Mother Earth. It was published in 1981. And a treatment of Aboriginal creation myth, The Rainbow Serpent. It was published in 1988. By her own admission, her poetry is sloganistic and direct, using easily accessible rhyme schemes and allusions. Polemical and ostensibly unsophisticated, Walker's poetry enjoys a large audience and is appreciated for its heartfelt, moving evocation of the disposition of the Aboriginal people, their plight and their future. So we can see that Nonukal's poems got worldwide attention. Readers are appreciated for its heartfelt, moving evocation of the disposition of the Aboriginal people, their plight and their future. Kath Walker, later known as Udgaro Nonukal, an Aboriginal poet, artist, conservationist and political activist. Kath Walker changed her name to Udgaro Nonukal in 1988. Then I want to speak about her educational value. In 1964, she became one of Australia's first published Aboriginal poets with the release of We Are Going, poems by Kath Walker. This was followed by collections of poetry, prose and art, including The Dawn is at Hand. It was published in 1966. Nonukal received the Jessie Litchfield Award for Literature. In interviews, Nonukal identified Aboriginal people as the inspiration for her work, seeing herself as expressing the voices of her community. She saw poetry as the most personal form of written expression and as a natural extension of Aboriginal oral traditions of storytelling and song making. Nonukal Udgaro used her poetry to express it as a natural extension of Aboriginal oral tradition of storytelling and song making. Nonukal was active in the 1960s civil rights movement and the campaign for the 1967 referendum, which urged the removal of passages in the Australian Constitution which discriminated against Aboriginal people. In 1969, she became the first Aboriginal Australian to run for a seat in a state parliament, but she was unsuccessful in gaining a majority vote. She also tried in politics. She was active in the 1960s civil rights movement. Then in 1969, she became the first Aboriginal Australian to run for seat in a state parliament. Unfortunately, she didn't get the majority vote. She played a prominent role as a Queensland representative on the Federal Council for the Advancement of Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders, and its predecessor, the Federal Council for Aboriginal Advancement, urging members to unite to fight for human rights. So she worked for the Aboriginals' rights. Nonukal was born on Micheriba, North Stradbroke Island in southeastern Queensland. She returned there in 1971 and established Mungalba, a sitting down place, which she used as an education and cultural center. Environmental protection was the major theme of her work there. So we can see that she returned back to her native place in 1971 and she established Mughal a sitting down place. There she started an education and a cultural center. She gives importance to the environmental protection through her work there. She wrote and illustrated a children's book. It's very important. Her children's books are Father Sky and Mother Earth, which helped popularize books with aboriginal and environmental themes. This particular children's book, Father Sky and Mother Earth, helped to get the popularity with aboriginal and environmental themes. In 1970, Nonukkal had been appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire, we can shortly call it as MBE, for services to the community. At the time, she accepted the honor in the belief that it would raise awareness of issues affecting Aboriginal people. In 1987, she returned the award in protest against the planned 1988 bicentenary celebrations to mark the 200th anniversary of British colonization of Australia. For Aboriginal people, she said, there had been 200 years of rape and carnage. That's the reason, that's why she returned back her award in 1987. Nonukkal's decision to return the MBE coincided with her adoption of a name that would identify more closely with her originality. Udgaro meaning paper bark tree, whose bark is used for drawing. Meaning is paper bark tree. It's very important. University is asking this question repeatedly. The meaning of Udgaro. Udgaro means paper bark tree. It is referred to her role as a writer and artist. Nonukkal is the name of her people, the traditional owners of Nijeriba and adjoining land for more than 20,000 years. Paper bark and Nonukkal is her tribe's name. Hence, Udgaro of the Nonukkal tribe. God but not forgotten. Udgaro died on September 9, 1993 at the age of 72 in Brisbane, Australia of cancer, leaving behind her 2 sons. A national celebration of Black Australian writers had been planned for September 30th of that year at Mughal, and her family assured the participants that she would have wanted it to take place despite her absence. A trust was established in February of 1994 with the goal of continuing Udgaro's work toward an understanding between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians. Udgaro Nonukkal has been described by those who knew her as direct, impassioned, deeply committed, and controversial. She spoke and wrote bluntly about the mistreatment of her people, so much so that she frequently ruffled the feathers of her many readers while trying to open their eyes. In Stradbroke Dreamtime, it was published in 1972, she described her girlhood home as a place stocked with natural beauty. Ferns and flowers growing in abundance, white miles of sand stretching as far as the eye could see. In the same piece, she lamented the fact that Stradbroke is dying. The birds and animals are going. The trees and flowers are being pushed aside and left to die, and assured the reader that greedy, thoughtless, stupid, ignorant man will suffer. His ruthless bulldozers are digging his own grave. So we can see that how human beings are exploiting the beauty of nature. So she already reminded us they will suffer. Munro, an Aboriginal intellectual, coined the term poetimics to describe Nonukkal, whom he identified more as a polemicist than a poet. In July of 2002, the Australian Workers' Heritage Centre opened with the exhibition A Lot on Her Hands, which focused on Australia's working women. Oodgeroo Nonukkal's life is featured as one of the exhibitions. The Oxford Companion to 20th Century Literature in English wrote, overall her work and life was passionate and articulate expression of wrongs inflicted upon Australian Aboriginal people and of the Aboriginals' indomitable will not only to survive but to flourish. Oodgeroo's seemingly timeless popularity is a testament to both her survival and her prosperity. Oodgeroo Nonukkal, black rights activist, poet, environmentalist, and educator, was born Kathleen Jean Mary Ruska on 3rd November 1920 at Bulimba, Brisbane, second youngest of 7 children of Edward Ruska Labrador and his wife Lucy. Ted was a Nonukkal descendant and Lucy was born in central Queensland, the daughter of an inland Aboriginal woman and a Scottish migrant. Lucy at 10 years of age was removed and placed in an institution in Brisbane, and at 14 years of age, without the skills to read or write, was consigned to work as housemaid in rural Queensland. Ruska's childhood home was 1 mile on North Stradbroke Island, or Mincheriba, as it was known by the island's traditional owners, the Nonukkal. The settlement on the outskirts of Dunwich was the setting for Kate's earliest memories of hunting wild parrots, fishing, boating, and sharing in the community gong catch. In 1934, at 13, she completed her formal education at Dunwich State School. The family, like many entering the Depression, could not afford the nurse's training her older sister had received. She left home for Brisbane to work as a domestic for board and lodging, and less pay than white domestics received, but armed with the ability to read and a talent for writing. In World War II, after her brothers Edward and Eric were captured by the Japanese at the fall of Singapore in February 1942, Ruska enlisted in the Australian Women's Army Service on 28 July. After initial training as a signaller, she undertook administrative duties and was promoted to Lance Corporal in April 1943. In June, she transferred to the District Accounts Officer, where she remained until being discharged on 19 January 1944. She enjoyed team competition, founding a women's cricket team, the Brisbane All Blacks. On 8 May 1943, at the Methodist Church West End, she had married Bruce Walker, a childhood friend and a descendant of Aboriginal clans from Queensland's Logan and Albert Rivers region. He was an electric welder. Their union did not last, and as a single parent, she struggled to provide and care for her son Dennis. A course in stenography led to an office job but needed at home. She returned to the flexible hours of taking in ironing and cleaning for professional households. She worked for the medical practitioners whose worldly outlook, spirited family, and book-lined rooms encouraged her on artistic sensibilities. In 1953, she had a second son, Vivian. His father was Raphael Cilento Jr. In the 1940s, the Communist Party of Australia, the only political party without a white Australia policy and which opposed racial discrimination, had attracted Walker. Through the party, she gained skills in writing speeches, public speaking, committee planning, and political strategy, which stood me in good stead through life. But she left because they wanted to write my speeches. Writing prose and poetry, she joined the Brisbane Realist Writers Group. James Devaney encouraged the reluctant writer and sent a selection of her poems to Dame Mary Gilmore. 94 at the time of their meeting, Gilmore said, as Walker later recalled, "These belong to the world. Never forget you are the tool that trod them down only." At Jacaranda Press in Brisbane, Walker's poems found an advocate in submission reader Judith Wright, who recommended publication. In 1964, We Are Going became the first poetry publication by an Aboriginal Australian. Despite the success of that book and The Dawn is at Hand, her second book, which followed 2 years later, her work was dismissed by many critics as protest poetry. She would nevertheless win the Jessie Litchfield Award for Literature, a Fellowship of Australian Writers Award, and the Dame Mary Gilmore Medal. Sales of her poetry were claimed to rank second to Australia's best-selling poet. 2 years before her first book, in 1962, Walker had been elected Queensland State Secretary of the Federal Council for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advancement. While also a member of the Queensland Aboriginal Advancement League executive, she rose to the call for Aboriginal leadership and in the early 1960s travelled around Australia with FCAATSI delegates, among them with Faith Bandler, Douglas Nichols and Joe. Walker stood for the Australian Labor Party in the Liberal stronghold of Green Slopes in the 1969 state election but lost. London's 1969 World Council of Churches consultation on racism was the first of many international invitations which over the years would take her to Fiji, Malaysia, Nigeria, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. My People, a collection of combining her 2 previous books, would be her last poetry for a decade and a half. It was published in 1970. Aged 50 in 1971, suffering ill health and facing challenges for power from younger Aboriginal leaders, Walker returned to Midjariba. Near 1 mile, she assembled a Genya traditional shelter on negotiated leasehold land, the beginnings of a learning facility, and named it Mugalba, the sitting on place. Her teaching of Aboriginal culture on country inspired thousands of school children whom she saw as the bright future, as well as teachers and other visitors who made the barge trip across Moreton Bay. She published 2 children's books, I already told you, Stradbroke, Dreamtime, and Father Sky and Mother Earth. In 1983, she stood as a candidate for the Australian Democrat in the state election without success. During a tour of China as part of an Australia-China Council cultural delegation in 1984, Walker's enthusiasm to write poetry revived, resulting in the simultaneous publication in Australia and China of Cat Walker in China. It was published in 1988. She received prestigious awards including honorary doctorates from Macquarie University, Griffith University, Monash University, Queensland University of Technology. In 1977, she appeared in a film biography, Shadow Sister. Her performance won the 1977 Black Filmmakers Award in San Francisco. She also advised on and acted in Bruce Beresford's 1986 film The Fringe Dwellers. A veteran environmental campaigner, she spoke against uranium mining and opposed sand mining on Midjariba. In 1987, in protest at the bicentennial celebration of Australia Day, she famously returned the MBE to which she had been appointed in 1970. With her son Vivian in 1988, she wrote the script for the Rainbow Serpent Theatre, produced at World Expo 88 Brisbane. They wrote under their newly chosen Nonukal names Udgaro. These last few years together ended in 1991 with Kabul's AIDS-related death at 38. Heartsick but resolute, Udgaro served as a judge of the David Unaipon Award for Indigenous Writers, as an advisor on a national Aboriginal studies curriculum for teachers, and as patron of Queensland's first Writers' Centre. She died of cancer on 16 September 1993 at the Repatriation General Hospital, Greenslopes, Brisbane. At her funeral on Midjariba, hundreds came to farewell the nation's much loved poet and activist who was buried at Bugalba beside Kabul. In 2006, Queensland University of Technology renamed its Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander support unit the Udgaro Unit. Director, charismatic, quick-witted and dignified Udgaro taught the spirituality of her ancestors, responsibility for the earth and the connection of all people. Her poetry and stories continue to inspire. She chose a long road and a lonely road, but oh, the goal is sure. All of you please open the textbook, page number 53. Let us go through Nonukal Udgaro in brief. Nonukal Udgaro was an Australian poet, political activist, artist and educator. She is also known as Cat Walker. She was also a campaigner for Aboriginal rights and was the first Aboriginal Australian woman to publish a book of verse. I think all of you remembered well. That book is We Are Going. Udgaro Nonukal was born on 3rd November in North Stradbroke Island. This island is called Midjariba by the Aboriginal people. Queensland of the Nonukal people of the Yagara group. Baptized Kathleen Jean Mary Ruska, Udgaro was the second youngest of 6 children to parents Ted and Lucy Ruska. Ted was a laborer who instilled a fierce sense of justice in his daughter. Leaving school at the age of 13, Udgaro worked as a domestic servant until 1939. Her writings and her poetry made her very popular. She wrote many books beginning with We Are Going. It was published in 1964. The theme of many of her works is the hope for understanding and peace between black and white Australians. In 1988, she adopted a traditional name Oodgarro, meaning paper bark tree. Nonukal, it's her tribe's name. She died in 1993. Oodgarro spent her last days on Stradbroke Island, where she established a cultural and environmental education center known as Mugalba. Mugalba means resting place. Now I hope all of you are very familiar with Nonukal Oodgarro. We will start the poem we are going in our next class. Thank you.